Hey guys, welcome back. All right, I'm in a new spot lecturing to you for another time. It's been a while, right? Because I was kind of using old canon lectures from the past, from last year when we were in COVID times. But now I'm breaking free of the shackles to do a new lecture. This one is about sort of where has the civil rights movement gone? From 1964-65. We talked about this traditional one, and a lot of historians believe the civil rights movement ended in 1964 and 65 because under law, there could be no segregation, no discrimination under federal and state law. And it takes a while for those things to get implemented, for us to have desegregated schools, desegregated society. Those things take a while to implement. But as we get to the 70s and 80s and 90s, where are we at? And a lot of people would say by the 1990s and early 2000s, we had reached sort of this kind of good sort of partnership in America and in history, which might have been therefore exacerbated and brought us to today. It doesn't mean that we haven't had a very difficult past that we've had to overcome, but where we're at today is sort of where has the civil rights movement gone from the 60s and 70s to today. So we are starting to do that work by our case study of the Black Lives Matter, which we will do in class and look at those slides in class. And then just trying to take some more elements and sort of race in our society and culture and kind of understand and pick apart some of the terms that you may be hearing and have heard throughout your young lives now. And so let's dive in and go continue where we left off in our last lecture, which was a look at the traditional civil rights movement. So this is where we ended and talking about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So all segregation in public facilities, separate drinking fountains, separate restaurants, movie theaters, schools has to end, right? By law, there can be no discrimination on the basis of race. And actually gender gets added to that as well. So you see this, no discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, or sex gets added in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And then by the Voting Rights Act of 1965, so there can be no restrictions to voting based on race. So everyone in the country is able and allowed to vote as long as they're American citizens and they are not felons, be able to vote in national, state, and local elections. You cannot have the things like literacy tests and poll taxes that existed to discriminate against people of color. So you might hear words like, voter fraud or voter suppression or voter restriction. And so really need to go look at what those laws are asking for, like the Georgia law. It expands kind of like how long you can vote, but you'd need a voter ID. Is that restrictive on the basis of color, saying that someone in order to vote needs an ID? And so a lot of people are saying that's racist to go have people get voter ID in order to prove that they're a citizen to vote. And that's caused organizations like the Major League Baseball Association to pull out of having the All-Star game in Atlanta. So, and a lot of people have spoken out against that, but go look at the law and understand it. You might just read a couple of different news articles from different outlets to understand what is being changed and or modified. So I'm just going to get through this. This is stuff we've kind of been through. Here's an example of a voter rights test. All right, went too far. And so as we get to the mid 1960s, though, we start to see victories with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, 1960, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So at that moment, it's like, okay, are we done? Well, obviously people's hearts don't change just because laws change, and that takes a bit more time. So this is really where the civil rights movement starts to go. Again, like Malcolm X has been assassinated at this point. Martin Luther King is going to be assassinated by 1968. And so there's going to be, it's kind of like a leaderless movement. There are going to be leaders in the movement, but not sort of one with national renown and integrity like Martin Luther King. And so the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee is kind of one of those organizations that carries the torch. It was a student organization created in 1960. They launched the sit-in movement. They work on the freedom rides in 61. They work on registering people to vote in Mississippi and other southern states in the early 1960s. But by the time that we get to the mid 1960s, late 1960s, they become more radical. They have a leader named Stokely Carmichael. He's the one that's going to be the first one to really champion what we call now critical race theory, saying, hey, we have a system built on racism that is going to reward those that are white and sort of disadvantage people of color. And we need to sort of tear down and undo these systems to bring about true equality and equity. And so it's not something that's new in our conversation. It's been around really for 50, 60 years. One of the more probably popular movements of the late 1960s, kind of, you could see a lot of similarities between the Black Lives Matter movement, is the Black Panther movement. And it was organized to take power back sort of from people that held power, from government agencies, from the police, from other business communities, and return it to the Black community. So police, schools, jobs, etc. This needs to be something that's run and housed and operated by Blacks instead of working in conjunction with whites or other racial groups. Okay, and so there was also the elevation and being proud to be African American and to have African American heritage and experience and have that shared experience together. And then this is probably one of the more controversial things, is they like to exercise their Second Amendment right to carry firearms in public, and would not just carry, handguns, but they would carry long guns, rifles, shotguns, and assault style rifles, to just say, hey, we are here, we're not moving, we are going to represent our community and protect our community from outside influences, including the police. It was started by Huey Newton and Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton's later going to be killed by the FBI in a shootout, really started by the FBI. And so he's going to be one of the most famous leaders again, sort of that dies in the 1960s. Okay. And so here's their mission statement. This compares a lot to the Black Lives Matter. We want the power to determine the destiny of our Black and oppressed communities, education that teaches us our true history and our role in present day society. We want free healthcare. We want an end to police brutality and murder of Black people, other people of color, all oppressed people inside the United States. We want the immediate end to wars of aggression. We want to stop being robbed by the capitalists of our Black community, et cetera. So you can see a lot of parallels between this language of the Black Panthers and even now in the Black Lives Matter movement. So it's not necessarily new language, it's kind of being revived from the late 1960s and being used nowadays as well. In terms of Hispanic Americans, they're going to have sort of a big advocate in the mid to late 1960s and 70s, and that is Cesar Chavez, who's going to lead a series of boycotts to unionize Hispanic farm workers and under the National Farm Workers Association. He's going to try to organize Filipino, but he really, this is one of his big critiques, is not going to work very well with Filipino farm workers. So he doesn't unionize every farm agricultural workers, but he specifically just focuses on Hispanic farm workers and organizing them so that they can advocate for higher wages and better working conditions, which they do get through launching a series of grape strikes on grapes, specifically in Texas and California, and really doesn't have many successes thereafter because of sort of his difficult relationship with the person who was helping him. I'm blanking on her name right now, but with other racial groups like the Filipinos. So that partnership is kind of break down. Okay. And so, but to make draw a connection to modern day, maybe you're hearing Latinx as a term used. So what kind of term should be used? We've heard Latino and Latina, if it's women that are being spoken about of Latina origin, or Hispanic is a broad covering for both Latinos and Latinas, or is it Latinx? Well, the definition of Latinx is a person of Latin American origin or descent, used as a gender neutral or non-binary alternative to Latino or Latina, right? Because you're taking on a gender pronoun with Latino or Latina. And so this was kind of just invented in the last couple of years. And they did a research study on it last year. Only 23% of US residents of Hispanic descent have heard the term Latinx before. Okay, of those 23% that had heard of that term before, 65% said they don't use the term, and they don't necessarily like the term either, because it's kind of robbing their language and their culture of kind of the the traditions that they've had. 35% said they didn't care, but they would not use the term. And then 10% of the 23% again said that they liked it more than Latino and Latina and used those. So that's really 2.3% of everyone polled in this poll last year in the Hispanic community that uses the term Latinx. So even amongst my students have kind of had this kind of interesting conversation with them as well. Do you like using Latinx? And most of them have said, I prefer Hispanic or Latino, Latina. So, but you've heard Latinx, and a lot more people are trying to use it more often, but now you can kind of understand it a bit more. For Native Americans in the 1960s, they're going to have sort of an inspiring movement as well within their racial group that's going to inspire a cultural renewal, sort of a renewal meaning, hey, let's revive our old traditions and our history and our language. And have this is why you have many tribes, even in our area, that have cultural interpretation centers, like for the Duwamish tribe or Snohomish tribe or Tulalip tribe. All these reservations have interpretive cultural interpretation centers. They're really cool to look at, including the Duwamish, which is down by the Port of Seattle, is really cool. Log cabin, great history in there. I love going in and reading the history, of course, but they're going to monitor police activities, also being fearful of the police and their treatment by police and the repression of their reservation activities and their population. And they're going to also coordinate employment programs for Native American. And they're going to emphasize the carrying on of their old traditions, and they're going to try to preserve and protect them as much as possible. Because as we know in the history of Native Americans, very repressed, very assimilated, so kind of forced up to give their traditions and their heritage in order to intermix into American society and culture, and especially education. We've heard about Indian boarding schools. And so there's been a very oppressive past, right? So this has been a good movement to try to restore a lot of those traditions. Okay. But Native Americans today feel that they are losing their culture and language. And so they're trying to make these ties and teach those pieces as much as possible. And the American Indian movement helped to support that. For women, one of the big organizations in the 60s and 70s was the National Organization for Women, which was founded to aid women's rights, uplift women's rights. You could think of it as a feminist organization, women that are valued higher than men. We call them like feminists or advocating for women's rights. And they're especially going to espouse economic equality. So if you're working the same job, you got to be making the same amount of money. In education equality. So having the same opportunities for women as for men, which has been very successful because now more women go to college than actually men. So they've actually, in the last 10 years, been above men in terms of the number of women that enroll in college. And also there's been what's called Title IX issues, which we see here on our high school campuses, specifically in sports, allowing women athletes to have the same opportunities, the same facilities, the same sort of levels of competition as men in men's sports. Maternity issues, granting leave to women that are pregnant and then have children and need leave to care for their children. We call that, there's the Family and Medical Leave Act, FMLA, and that's been passed and even broadened in our state within the last couple of years. And then they're going to fight for the Equal Rights Amendment too, saying that everything in society, regardless of gender, has to be the same. And so there's no uplifting of men, there's no uplifting of women. Everything is just, it's kind of just like a non-binary sort of thing where everyone has to be equal, and you don't account for any individualistic traits as a different gender, if that makes sense. And they're very radical today. They're around. Their major kind of goal is to advocate for abortion rights. They're pro-choice, and that has alienated some women since the 1960s that don't associate with the National Organization of Women or say that they don't represent them or their viewpoints as women. Okay, also the Gay Rights Movement launches in the 1960s. for a couple different reasons, mainly out of San Francisco, and even the Stonewall riots and rebellion that happens in New York State. But so the gay rights movements, this population has always been a minority, and it's less than 4.5% of Americans as of 2 years ago that identify as LGBTQ. That's lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, or queer. And they're mostly located in communities in the major cities of America. Okay, and the AIDS epidemic was something that was thought to have started. For the most part, is going to spread in the homosexual community in the 1980s. So there's this stigma for a long time that being homosexual means you had a higher increased chance of getting AIDS. And we dispelled that myth quite late in the 1980s, early 1990s. But that HIV/AIDS is firstly going to ravage the gay men community in San Francisco and then other major cities, including Seattle. But we also have a lot more awareness about it and how to stop transmitting that disease, right? So LGBTQ community is going to have more rights recently, more awareness, and increased opportunities. Gay marriage became enforced by the Supreme Court in 2015 nationally. It used to be on a state-by-state basis. Washington in 2012 legalized gay marriage, and we were kind of at the forefront of that. And just 3 years later, then it became a national issue. I believe it was 20-something states that had legalized same-sex marriage by that point. And so now gay marriage is enforced nationwide and still is a hot topic. Does every LGBTQ member have their full and equal protected rights as American citizens? And so issues keep coming up, right? And more so in terms of trans rights now and what transsexual Americans are able to do or not to do. And so this term keeps expanding, not just LGBTQ anymore, but it's now LGBTQIA plus. And here's the meaning that it keeps expanding to accommodate other genders. And so it's now lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, two-spirit, queer, intersex, asexual, and then the plus accommodates anyone else not mentioned. So you might see this term too out there. So the term keeps expanding, okay? And again, in 2015, homosexual marriage was legalized by the Supreme Court in all 50 states. There's also a national hate crimes law where if anyone's attacked because of their sexual orientation, that is a federal hate crime violation that carries stiffer penalties, and you don't remain in state court, you go automatically to a federal court jurisdiction. There's anti-discrimination laws that vary state from state. 22 states outlaw discrimination based on sexual identity, and gender identity. Including Washington State is one of those 22. So you cannot discriminate in housing or in the workplace, anywhere. You can't fire someone because they are transgender, for instance. That's a protected right in Washington State. So technically, every American has full equal rights under law. So what else is needed? Housing, workplace, education. What else has to be protected? I'll leave that up to you guys to research and to check into if you're interested. Okay. Moving on is into white privilege. This is a term that signifies, are white Americans more privileged in America just because they are white? Are there more opportunities for white people, no matter what economic background you come from, religious background, or even ethnic background? If you come from, you're an immigrant and you're white, are you afforded more opportunities just because of your whiteness? Does that translate into better legal privileges, more justice in the legal system for you? Does it translate into more wealth or better housing, more employment opportunities, better education? And so there's this idea of equality and equity. But just because you're white, do you necessarily get better opportunities in America? And I'll come back to that idea in a second. Also, there's a term you might have heard called systematic racism before, which the definition is, it's a form of racism that is allegedly embedded through laws within society or in organization. Okay, so racism that's embedded through laws within society or an organization. And what specifically is racism? It's the belief that groups of humans possess different behavioral traits corresponding to physical appearance and can be divided based on the superiority of one race over another. Those are both definitions coming from the Oxford Dictionary. So it does our system of government, our system of laws, our system of our culture, does it elevate one race over another? And is it systematic? Is it sort of within each element of our system? Okay, you might agree, you might disagree, but this is a term that you're hearing out there pretty often. So does racism show up in our lives across institutions and society? The wealth gap, employment, housing discrimination, drug arrests, immigration arrests, are people targeted just because of the color of their skin and racism that exists in our system. So the counter argument to this that you might have also heard is, yeah, America has had a troubling past and we're suffering the consequences from that. That's why people have different sort of wealth gap amongst races, or why there's different arrests amongst different racial groups. But America is the least racist country. Some historians and social psychologists would say America is the least racist country on earth because we are the most intermixed. We are actually the most intermixed racially country in the world. And everyone has been granted the full equal rights under law. So if you are attacked, like, you have sort of a legal recourse for that. If you're discriminated against in your workplace, you have a legal recourse for that, because all those things are illegal. And so you can use the court system to sort of obtain justice. And people would say that separating people still by race and elevating one race over another creates continued racial paranoia, division, and hatred. And a great sort of example of a response is from Tim Scott's State of the Union response that he said last week. He said, "Hear me clearly, America is not a racist country." So, and as a Black senator, he was saying that. So, and he caught a lot of heat for that, saying, "You are wrong, you're false, there's systematic racism." So, or you might agree with him. So, but I'm sure you've heard of this term. Okay, and then we've done the Black Lives Matter case analysis, or we'll do that. And we've read through these slides. And also, there's another term called critical race theory, which is a spawn off of what's called critical theory, which is a Marxist inspired, so a communist inspired, and made by Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud. They were putting forth this philosophy that we need to understand and help overcome the social structures through which people are dominated and oppressed. So if people are dominated and oppressed, those systems need to be thrown off. It's kind of like a communist revolution. Well, how we see that kind of evolve into the critical race theory, it's also an intellectual movement, but instead of looking at just economics like critical theory does, critical race theory looks at sort of the racial constructs of race in society, and says any category that oppresses and exploits people of color needs to be thrown off, right? And through revolution, undone. So critical race theorists nowadays hold that the law and legal institutions in the United States are inherently racist, and that they create and function social, economic, and political inequalities between whites and people of color, especially African Americans. These two definitions coming from Britannica Encyclopedia. Okay, and so it's been making news a lot lately, even this last week or two, even before that, in many cities and states or our nation, because many cities and states are outlawing critical race theory taught in schools, saying that Trump, like, for instance, outlawed CRT in any government agency being taught, being trained by an executive order. And then on the first day that Biden took over as president, he undid that executive order and said, hey, we need to encourage the teaching of critical race theory in the federal government. And as of, let's see, was it last week or last weekend in Southlake, Texas? It's a suburb of Dallas. The school board voted out school board members that were advocating to teach children in that district critical race theory and staff. And so those school board members all got voted out and replaced by school board members that said, we are not going to teach critical race theory in our schools. And also Rick DeSantis, the governor of Florida, said this last week that he is making it illegal to teach critical race theory inspired frameworks in Florida, especially in business and in education as well. So what is so controversial about it? Why are these people speaking out against it? Is just, again, you are elevating people of one race over another, right? Is creating sort of an elevation of one race over another. And some people are saying, hey, that's, you know, we don't want to move that direction, continue to divide. Okay. So do we have, my question to you is, do we have critical race theory in the North Shore School District? Okay, again, just like we did for Black Lives Matter, our district has made a stand on Black Lives Matter. They've also said kind of this stuff in our framework for equity and working to create equitable outcomes for all of our students within our school district. So here's what they say they are working on. They are working to fully realize our mission to educate all students. It is our imperative that we recognize the oppressive institutional barriers that contribute to the inequitable educational experiences and outcomes within our school system. We will continue to take action to eliminate barriers as we strive for educational equity in and across North Shore. Okay, and so here's the objectives that they're trying to use, or we as staff members are trying to use. But number one, all North Shore students and staff will develop and consistently demonstrate racial literacy and cultural competence. Each member of the NSD will develop and demonstrate the ability to lead systematic change that results in equitable schools. 3, students of all minoritized identity groups will be seen, heard, and valued. And 4, all learning experiences in NSD will be intersectional, culturally relevant, and personally challenging. Okay, so is this critical race theory sort of highlighting the differences for good, or is it creating division within our district? So what do you think? I'm not trying to sway you, but you probably see examples of this within our classroom, and our announcements talk about the word of the week. Is this an example of critical race theory in the classroom? How do you feel about this? This is a statement coming from Principal Price. For our students and staff, they've been given word of the week to start conversations and engage with them at their level. As a committee, this is our Racial and Equity Justice Committee. As a school, we brainstorm ways to work with teenagers at entry level points, more advanced levels, and for some classes with a high level of trust and interest in their class, a deeper dive. Please know, like our kids, we are all at different phases of learning with these terms, and some teachers are more comfortable with guiding these conversations than others. To that end, our aspiration is to start the conversations and hope our students are exposed at some level. If you want to engage with your children in these conversations at home, here are some of the words and phrases we've encouraged teachers to discuss: empathy, acceptance versus tolerance, community, microaggression, honor, diversity, inclusion, enough, justice, tradition, intersectionality, vulnerable, assimilation, implicit bias, hate crime, model minority myth, voter suppression. So those are words that you've heard in the announcements. Is that providing for good discussions? Have you had good discussions in class about it? Has it been very difficult conversations? Is that making you feel better? Or you feel like you're learning through them? And is that critical race theory? Again, elevating one race over another and trying to undo systematic injustice done to students of color. So, all right. So to continue to talk, there's this idea of equality and equity. You know, many historians would look at the 60s and say, hey, we have equality. Everyone is equal under law. But many people would also say, hey, there's still people that are disadvantaged that need some extra help because they're still maybe in a system that is not getting them sort of equal access because they are already starting kind of behind the start line. So equality is the state of being equal, especially in status, rights, and opportunities. So we'd probably say everyone in America has equality. You have equal opportunities. You have equal rights. You can still, you know, we've had everyone from multiple races and racial groups achieve a lot of different sort of places in society. And then equity is the idea, the quality of being fair and impartial. So it's symbolized by this cartoon. So equality, everyone starts off on the same block, but some people might be more disadvantaged or have things that have been working against them in their past or in their education or economically. So even though like they have an equal kind of shot to get an apple off the tree, they don't have the opportunity to get it because it's still too far off for them. So equity is this idea that, hey, we are giving boosts up to everyone, regardless of sort of their background, if they've had difficulties and struggles, so that everyone can reach that apple. Okay, so equality versus equity. So you might be hearing those terms as well. Okay, and one of our last slides is this minority majority. I don't know if you've heard this or this term before. It means that the population is composed of less than 50% of Caucasians. When that happens, it means that there's a minority majority, right? There's less than 50% Caucasians, whether you're looking at a school, maybe you're looking at a college or a workplace. And so where are our numbers at as a country? Are we close to, as a country, being a minority majority country? It's not happening anytime soon, maybe the next 20 years. But if we look at the 2020 census figures, which just came out, there's 328 million people living in America. 60% of them are Caucasian, 18% Hispanic, 13% Blacks. There's 1.3% Native American. Asians at 6%, Hawaiian Pacific Islander is 0.2%, and then people that claim two or more races is at 3%. Okay, and so that's the numbers of people living in America right now. So when this number reaches less than 50%, then we've become a minority majority country. There's 5 states currently that are minority majority: Hawaii, New Mexico, California, Texas, and Nevada. So there's more minorities in these 5 states than there are Caucasians, than there are whites. So minorities are the majority in these 5 states. And the whole of the United States is projected to be minority majority by the year 2043. So that's in your lifetime, okay? That this projection is going to sort of sway where there's going to be less than 50% Caucasians, whites, in America, and more minorities. So, okay, so that brings me to this question: where are we now? Okay, has the civil rights movement ended? Are there still people groups, different racial groups, different gender groups, or sexual orientation groups that are still advocating for rights, whether it be equal rights, whether it be equitable opportunities? Where are we at? Are we still on our way someplace, or have we arrived? Everyone has equal opportunities. Okay, so is our goal equality, providing equal opportunities to everyone? Or is it equity, where we need to uplift and help or undo systems that have unequitable outcomes? So I'm going to leave that with you. I'm not trying to sway you one way or another, but leave you to think about that, maybe discuss with your families, with your friends. I know you're seeing all this stuff probably in social media or in the news if you're following it. So hopefully this has been enlightening to just get some sort of base knowledge for you. All right. Thanks, y'all. And I'll see you soon.